Hey guys, today's story is a bit of a chaotic one. So the very first session I ever played in was a massive horror story for all sorts of reasons. The cast of characters are as follows. The DM, who was a good friend and a fantastic DM, but this was also his first time ever DMing. Tulip, who was a chaotic evil, I think, druid with a penchant for making interesting choices. Mr. Death, who was a warlock of some sort, and earned this nickname through some bad luck, as well as stubbornly following through plans to the bitter end, and various other accidents. He rarely ended the week with the same character that he started with. Shy, who played a dragonborn sorcerer, but she was both fairly new and preferred to take a back seat in such a large group. The Otaku, who was a that guy, and played an edgy rogue with a flair for the dramatic. Nabi, who was just a half-orc fighter. McCree, who was a female human monk. And then finally myself, a lawful evil gnome, druid with an affinity for poisons, obsessed with rabbits. Now, the more astute of you will already notice a red flag. 7 players, all at level 1, plus the DM. We were told we would start at a festival near the capital, but when the session began, we all woke up in darkness. Because during the festival, chaos magic had swept the area, causing all sorts of horrible things to happen, and we had each done something under its influence that warranted being arrested. My character vaguely remembered having his brain outside of his body. The Otaku vaguely remembered violating a unicorn, which the DM took and rolled it into a very funny subplot. But regardless, we took about an hour to come around, and we were introduced to each other, and the situation was explained to us. We did terrible things, we were arrested, and we were in a guard tower in a rural area, and our captors knew that it wasn't necessarily our fault, but as penance, we would be sent to find the source of chaos, enforced by a magically binding contract. We were then assigned 3 NPCs. A goody two-shoes dwarf Claire Keelbot, a neurotic wizard who knew something about the source of the chaos, and a tiefling girl who was the liaison for the guards. And then, the cell door opened, and all hell broke loose. McCree immediately made a break for the armory, Tulip heading outside and using Thornwhip like a lasso to climb onto the 2nd floor, where they immediately began to plunder the guard commander's room, which they were found out and dove through the window to escape, knocking themselves out in the process. And meanwhile, in the armory, McCree did her best to loot the place like a Fallout game, while batting away puzzled guards, with the rest of the party eventually getting things under control, tying up Tulip in the process, and setting off. The problem here was more than half of the party was evil-aligned, and the rest were neutral. And as a party, we resented being under duress and began plotting. We traveled across the countryside seeing the effects of the chaos magic, and it wasn't great. Eventually we encountered a village in very bad shape, and a military detachment was sent to help them, headed by the Queen's personal guards. The NPC Tiefling acted as a temporary leader, and talked with the Queen's guard. My character used minor illusion to make it look like the Tiefling lowered her weapon threateningly, and the rest of the party caught on, and we all made up a story about her being a bandit. And we managed to convince the Queen's Guard to arrest the Tiefling for kidnapping and blackmail. And once we were in the village, we found lodging, and the party split up into a couple of groups. Otaku went off to do his own edgy things, and ended up getting arrested. Mr. Death seduced a guard in order to knock him out and steal his uniform, while the majority of us decided to rob the keep at the center of the village. And to achieve this, my poison boy put very strong laxatives in the stew that was being served to everyone. And when they dived for the loos, we set fire to a few buildings and headed to the tower. We knew that the Queen's Guard was in the building, but we didn't know the rules of D&D and figured it would be like real life, where if you hit them around the head while they're looking the other way, then you win. Now, I remind you at this point as well that we were level 1, so we walked up and found the Queen's Guard chatting with the Tiefling NPC, and it looked like we had been found out. So, as damage control, we jumped both of them. And having talked to the DM since, the Queensguard was a CR3 stat-blocked knight with some minor regeneration from an occult connection. She should have TPK'd us. But the DM has the worst rolling luck of anyone I have ever met. An hour and a bit of combat later, and through some good rolls on our part, and the inability to roll over a 5 on the DM's, both the Queensguard and the Tiefling lay dead. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that the Queensguard was using a musket? New technology and very valuable. So we grabbed it and dipped. Meanwhile, Otaku freed a man while escaping from prison. And it turned out that this man was crazy, and he summoned a demon, which added to the already apocalyptic scene in the village. With that crap show behind us, and a dead party leader, and a magically binding contract making sure that we would still be doing the task, we headed to the source of the chaos, which was some sort of wizard tower. Session 2 started here, and I wasn't able to make it to that one, but the party found a valuable gem, but they couldn't decide what to do with it, and then McCree smashed it. It turned out that it housed a demon, so when it was smashed, it popped out and everyone dove into the basement while it went nuts. In said basement, we found the evil wizard who was responsible for the chaos, and he was busy mutating himself into what seemed like a young dragon. He had killed off the 2 remaining NPCs in the party, and then we killed him. And for some reason, McCree deliberately suicided his character, and it turned out that he already had a backup ready. Another monk with the exact same backstory, subclass, features, and personality. The only difference? Name and stats. This one, he had rolled much higher stats on, and the DM wasn't too happy about this one. And from this point on, I'll be time-skipping and only mentioning specific instances of horror. My character decided that we needed to restock and sell our loot in a city, and with no available map and misunderstandings, it resulted in us inadvertently derailing everything the DM had prepared plot-wise. And on the journey there, Tulip had decided to pick a fight in one of the villages, and turn into a wolf in the bar, and then run into the town center. At a customs checkpoint, where we spent the night in, while the same character went spying and got captured. And after we were kicked out, the other drunk party members set off magical fireworks, resulting in us nearly being attacked by another band of Queensguards. In the city, Tulip managed to get involved in PvP, and ran away from the group, and then got rescued by the local mafia, who promptly ransomed her. The warlock got hold of a bag of beans, and summoned a boulette in the alleyway, nearly dying in the process, and causing the sale of magic items in the city to be restricted from that point onwards. And the otaku proceeded to be an edgy cultist very openly, earning the ire of actual cultists of the very same god. And then, we get to McCree. McCree was a feared ex-pirate who had plenty of criminal contacts, despite only being level 2. He used this to call a council of underground mafia bosses, and at this council, he used this platform to advocate for overthrowing the queen. This took the form of a speech that took an hour and a half. During this, he changed the model that he intended to replace her with no less than 7 times, without noticing that he had done so. The mafia bosses simply asked, "What's in it for us?" with him saying that they would actually be in charge. So this would be an oligarchy, right? No, that would be too obvious. Install a puppet ruler, and who would get to control said ruler? As all the mafia bosses hate each other. Okay, so how about a republic? And this carried on seamlessly for some time, and it turns out that the mafia bosses included some creatures that looked human, but were probably capable of leveling entire streets in a single attack, plus a demigod. The reason that they weren't in all-out war? The queen was aware of them, and was powerful enough to beat them all senseless if she took them on one-on-one. And she was a fantastic administrator who knew that illegal stuff would happen anyway. She figured she might as well know about it and keep an eye on it. And if they didn't cross any lines, she wouldn't nuke them from orbit. And the bosses finally ended the entertainment, beat McCree to a pulp, and kicked him to the curb. It turns out that the demigod mafia boss was keeping tabs on us since session 1, and was pretty angry over the problems that we caused her. She executed one of us, specifically Mr. Death's warlock, who then went on to become an NPC that served her, since she was the demigod of death, and she pointed us back to the main storyline. My character was also executed, and I used it to bring in a halfling gunslinger employed by the Queen, designed to rein in some of the more chaotic elements of the party. In the next session, Mr. Death's new urchin character was introduced, and was promptly killed by the otaku after pickpocketing something out of his backpack. In the next session after that, Mr. Death's new bard attempted to eavesdrop on a conversation and managed to get his owl familiar caught and eaten by Tulip and Nobby. And then he cast the sleep spell on a tower full of guards, to which his character was arrested, and a new one was prepared for the following week. The otaku also had a serious god complex, and unwittingly fell into several clever traps that the DM had set for him. He decided that he had special powers and immortality, and the DM gave him those. The DM just didn't tell him how they worked, so he was unable to use them. And the first wizard that the guy approached to test his powers on took one look at the shard of the Demon King that was embedded, and helped the guy extract it so that it could be used. He was given a box with the power inside and told not to open it, while it condensed for the next few months. This was the very same box that he killed Mr. Death's urchin for trying to pickpocket. It turns out, the wizard had just extracted the soul shard and given the rogue a box that had the light cantrip in it. The otaku decided it was the Scourge of Grimnir, and the DM had him meet the actual person who was the Scourge of Grimnir, while awaiting execution for killing Mr. Death's latest character in cold blood. He was subjected to a few hours of mental torture, and laughed at for being so pathetic before the actual Scourge sourced him a very good lawyer who got him a plea deal that involved being an indentured servant of the Queen for the rest of his life, which conveniently meant that he would continue to adventure with the party as our mission was sanctioned by the Crown. And after a little while, McCree ended up having to join in remotely, but would frequently turn up late, talk over the DM, and fall asleep during sessions before being kicked out. All in all, it was quite the chaotic introduction to D&D, and over time, the more volatile players dropped out one by one, and the campaign became a very long-running one, and very enjoyable, with some epic moments and a gripping plot. Well guys, that's the end of the story. If you liked it and would like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future videos. But, as always, have a good one.